Now I'd like to talk about probably the most famous piece of evidence used to discredit gun ownership, and that would be the 1986 Kellermann Study. When you talk to people, they'll a lot of times bring up a number. They'll say, well, a gun that you own is way more likely to kill you or your family than to kill an intruder, and the idea that guns are used for defensive purposes is, it's negligibly true, and they're just this horribly hazardous thing, and supposedly it was proven. They'll come up with a statistic offhand. I think it's usually they'll say you're 43 more times likely to be killed by your gun than to kill an assailant, and this comes from the 1986 Kellermann Study, which itself was based on an analysis of homicides. I think it was King County, Washington, from 1978 to 1983 or something like that. And it's not to say that the study is fake or completely bogus, but there's certain problems with the methodology. One is that in the paper they had a recommendation. They said, well, this study indicates that it's not advisable to keep a gun in the home, and that people should probably consider not keeping a gun in the home, and they certainly should not keep a gun in the home for self-defense, because clearly it's a greater hazard to them than to others. But then people started to ask, okay, so and how many of these homicides and these killings were people killed by their own gun? I mean, if you're going to say that owning your own gun is going, you shouldn't own your own gun because it will lead to your death, you should be able to say, well, how many times did your own gun actually kill you, or how many times were you, incidentally you owned a gun and then you were killed by another one. And the thing is, with Kellerman, it's for years and years he would never say, and then he would only indicate a little bit. And so the bottom line is, in the vast majority of the cases, you aren't killed with your own gun. You're killed by someone else's gun, or a gun that's not kept in the home. And so the policy recommendation doesn't make any sense. The other big problem with the study is that it only counts the killing of an assailant as a defensive gun use. So if you were to be assaulted 1,000 times in a year, and in 950 of those times you brandished your weapon and the assailant ran away, and in 49 of those other times you fired at the assailant and he either ran away or you wounded him, and then one time you killed your assailant, Kellerman would say you used your gun defensively once, when in reality you used it 1,000 times. And the reason I even picked those numbers as an example is because they are a reasonable estimate of the ways guns are used defensively. The majority of the time, probably the supermajority, more than 95%, when guns are used defensively, they aren't even fired. They're brandished, and the vast majority of criminal assailants do not escalate at that point. They flee. Among the percentage where the gun is actually fired, most of the time the bullet doesn't hit anybody. It's either a warning shot or it's a miss. And of the times that it does actually hit the assailant, it's only like 1 in 7 that they die. And so it's only, these are hard to come to exact numbers, but the estimates are that the number of times that an assailant is killed is something like 1 in 1,000. And so for Kellerman to say that you can never use it for, if you look at his study, he lists how many suicides there were, how many homicides in the household, and how many defensive gun killings, and he lists 9. Well, if there were 9 defensive gun killings, then there very well could have been 9,000 defensive gun uses. And only the vast majority don't result in an injury or a death. And if you're interested in looking up estimates, Gary Kleck has probably done the most research on this. He's not the only one, but he's the one who's done the most comprehensive studies of these defensive gun uses. And so Uh, the Kellermann study is flawed. It's not necessarily a purposeful lie, and it would be wrong to just assert that it is bogus. But it is important to realize that there are big gaping holes in it. And the other thing is that you're talking about one study that came out now going on 30 years. Crime statistics in the United States have changed a lot in those 30 years. Basically, crime has gone down. And as I've noted before, the number of guns in private hands, the number of people with guns in private hands, and the proportion of people with guns have all increased. And over that long a span of time, it's actually been a pretty decent increase. And if a gun in the home actually made homicide more likely, then we should have seen a increase in homicides and accidental deaths and whatnot, and that certainly hasn't happened. And whereas the Kellermann study is one county over a couple of years, again, that's another problem with it. It's a fairly small sample set considering. It's problematic, but it's important to look at it. I recommend people go and research it a little bit so that you can, when these numbers are thrown at you, you don't want to sound like an ignoramus, and you don't want to sound like anti-scientific and be like, oh, I just don't believe those numbers or whatever. It's good to be able to question them and say, well, what about defensive gun uses that don't end in the assailant being killed? And one of the other problems with it, I think, is that they, would look at a homicide and then they'd say, well, was there a gun in the house? They wouldn't just say, well, let's look at everybody in this county who has a gun and see how many of them have homicides. I mean, it'd be like looking at a murder victim and say, okay, let's go look at their house, take an inventory, and finding that they all had TVs, and then concluding that, oh my gosh, 100% of people who are murdered have TVs. We should ban TV. Correlation is not equal causation, and you need a whole hell of a lot more studies than Kellermann, and they have to be a lot more rigorous to come to the conclusions that people come to. So, all right, that's it for this one.